so he wasn't prepared to forsake the religion of his forefathers. And the Prophet Muhammad had great grief about this. However, God said to him that you don't guide the hearts, it's God who guides the hearts. You can't guide the people you love, it's God who guides the hearts. And this is a vital lesson for all Muslims and for all people, that the hearts are in God's hand. We can talk to people, we can communicate with them. The most we can do is create an environment of tolerance and respect and understanding. But guidance is in God's hands. So this is what the Prophet Muhammad was told. So he lost his uncle Abu Talib in the 10th year, and he also lost his wife Khadija, who was the rock. She was the one who supported him, and she was the one who had faith in him. She was the first to accept the religion of Islam. She was the first to accept and submit herself to Islam and to accept him as a messenger. So he took great comfort in Khadija, great confidence in Khadija, and this is why it caused great grief for the Prophet Muhammad. Now, these are 10 years after his prophethood. He's still in Mecca. The next 3 years led to the establishment of a Muslim community in Medina, which was approximately 400 kilometers north of Mecca. 400 kilometers north, kilometers or miles, kilometers north of Mecca. And this is where the seeds were being sown for a community to be established there. How? The Hajj season came, pilgrimage. And as I mentioned, pilgrimage was a custom that took place from the time of Abraham. So people from Medina were coming. Pagans were also doing pilgrimage. So they came to Medina, and it was at this time that Prophet Muhammad saw an opportunity to invite people towards the call of Islam, towards the one God, towards his prophethood, towards the Quran. And 6 people at one occasion embraced Islam at the occasion of Hajj, and they returned to Medina, and the following year they came back with approximately 80 or 12, and then the 3rd year they came back with about 80, and the Prophet Muhammad sent with them a teacher. And this teacher that the Prophet Muhammad sent with them was a young man called Mus'ab bin Umair. And Mus'ab bin Umair was one of the proud, arrogant youth of Mecca before Islam, from a very, very rich and noble family. In fact, he was so lavish that and he would always dress so beautifully and smell so good that the streets he would walk in, you could tell that Mus'ab's been in these streets because of the smell, the fragrance. But when he accepted Islam, he gave up all of his lavish life and his extravagance and the pomp and all the luxury, because his parents rejected him. So much so that when he died later in a battle in the Medinan life, there wasn't even sufficient cloth to bury him. And the companions of the Prophet cried at this scene. And the commentators of the prophetic narration say that those tears were not tears of sorrow, they were tears of joy, that Mus'ab has succeeded, he has attained salvation, he has given his life for the God. So Mus'ab was sent as a teacher to the people of Medina. It was there in Medina that the Muslim community was established initially, and this paved the way to the Prophet's migration to Medina. Later, 13 years after the prophethood of Muhammad, he was instructed by God to leave the town of Mecca because he was being driven out. The torture and persecution became too much for the Muslims to take, and God ordered him to leave for Medina. And it's a very huge incident, but this is the turning point. The migration from Mecca to Medina is the turning point, because in Mecca there was weakness, instability in the community because of small numbers, and they were weak. But in Medina there was a community already established, ready to receive the Prophet Muhammad. But even this incident of hijrah, migration to Medina, had many incidents within it, because the migration wasn't simple. People were looking for him. They had put a bounty. If anyone finds Prophet Muhammad, he will get 100 camels. He will receive 100 camels in reward. So people were looking for him, and it was during this occasion that he hid in a cave called Thawr. And in this cave, he had his companion with him, Abu Bakr. And Abu Bakr and the Prophet Muhammad stayed in this cave for 3 days. Nobody found them there. And then they left, and then they went to a place called Quba, which is close to Medina, and they stayed there for approximately a fortnight. And then from there they went to Medina, and it was in Medina that even the Jewish community were prepared to receive him, because they had learned in their scriptures that a prophet will come, and they were awaiting the arrival of the final prophet themselves. But later we learn from the Quran that because he wasn't from the Israelites, they were not prepared to accept him, because he was from the Ishmaelite, from the family of Ishmael. So this is basically the Prophet Muhammad's moving to and migration to Medina. In Medina, the Prophet Muhammad lived for approximately 10 years, and this is where he encountered different communities, and this is where many of the wars that took place was in Medina. So there were wars with different communities, because the Meccans from Mecca, they were still very hard-hearted towards the Muslims, because there was their own people who had left them, deserted them, and left and gone to Medina. And it tainted their reputation amongst other Arab regions, that they had driven out their own people from their town. So they were very hard-hearted towards the Muslims, and they had seized all of the goods and all of the possessions of Muslims that they had left behind. And it was during one of those occasions when they had decided to take all of those goods and possessions and go for trade and business to Syria, which was the capital of trade. It was at that time the first battle of Islam took place, because the Prophet Muhammad ordered his companions, instructed them that take what is yours, what belongs to you. So a group of 313 companions had left Medina, and they went to get their goods. And here we find that the caravan that had left for trade took another route, because they were informed about the intention of the Muslims, that they want their goods back. So then they sent a message to the Meccans and said, prepare for war, and they sent 1,000 people. And that's where you see the difference between the armies. 313 unarmed people with an army of 1,000, but the 313 were victorious. God says in the Quran that sometimes a small army can overpower a large army with the permission of God. So this is the first war of Islam. Then because of this defeat, they came back the following year, 2 years later, in the Battle of Uhud. And there was somewhat of a victory, somewhat of a loss in that battle. Some incidents took place. But then in the 5th year of the Prophet's Medinan life, another war took place called Khandaq. And this is when the people of Mecca came again with many different tribes to finish off the mission of Muhammad, or finish off Muhammad in Medina. But no actual war took place, because the Prophet and his companions dug trenches outside on the borders of Medina, so nobody can come in. So this was the third battle, the Battle of Khandaq. And some other battles took place in the Prophet's Medinan life. And it was the 9th year of, actually the 8th year of the Prophet's Medinan life, that he returned to Mecca. And he returned to Mecca conquering the town and victorious. And there are many incidents related to that too. The reason why the Prophet Muhammad returned to Mecca in this manner was because they had a treaty with the Meccans that the Meccans broke. So they were treacherous. They broke the treaty. So the Prophet Muhammad returned to Mecca with his companions, and he marched upon Mecca, and Mecca was conquered by Prophet Muhammad in the 8th year of his Medinan life. But he returned to Medina, and he lived in Medina thereafter. And it was the 9th year that different delegations and tribes came and pledged their allegiance to the Prophet Muhammad and became Muslim within the Hijaz Peninsula, within the Arab regions. And in the 10th year, at end of the 10th year, the Prophet Muhammad died. So these are some of the historical background about Prophet Muhammad.